So the session presenter name is Bruce Lindvall. And so when Bruce has finished presenting, there is a scheduled Q&A session at the end of our presentation. So please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, on Whova, and we'll be monitoring those during the presentation. And you can post it during the session, or you can do it after the session is over or after his presentation is over. Please structure your question in the format of the last name of the presenter, which is Lindvall, and then :question. In order to stay on time, we will need to end the session at the designated time, which is 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we apologize if we cannot get to all of the questions at the end of the live session. However, you can always contact the speakers through networking features on Whova or Discord to ask the questions here. So a little bit about Bruce. He's been in the higher eds for he has a lot of experience in the higher eds. He has his BS in mathematics and MS in guiding and counseling and PhD in educational administration, all at Purdue University. He was Associate Dean at University of Kansas Edwards campus, and he's now the Assistant Dean for Graduate Studies at Northwestern University. So Bruce, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are across the United States. I'm glad you've joined the meeting. I always try to present in about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up, as you've heard, to your questions. And then we can go offline after that. You can always email me. I'm going to make an offer to you like I do every year, that if you want to send me things for review, I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and start through my slides here. I think one of the first questions, and some of you are seniors trying to decide, some of you are younger students, you can never start the process too early. So do I need a graduate degree? Obviously, if you're getting a degree in engineering, you're going to have job offers, you're going to have excellent salaries. The question is, do I need a graduate degree later on in my career? So especially this year, I think you've got to keep your options open, because the two things that you typically can do, you either stay in school and work on a master's or a PhD, or you go to work. And one of the most popular questions is always, should I go to work for a while and then return to school? You have to answer that question. There is no right or wrong answer. Then another question is, will I complete a master's or a PhD? Or should I start out with a master's and then do my PhD once I finish my master's? I'm sure that if you're not thinking about it, your family's going to say, how are we going to pay for graduate school? We had to sacrifice a lot to get you through an undergraduate degree, so how are we going to pay for graduate school? Whenever I have an outstanding undergrad at Northwestern come to me, I feel like I owe it to the student, I owe it to all of us in this country. Have you ever thought about a PhD? And the natural reaction is, well, I don't want to be a faculty member. I would tell you at Northwestern that 80% of our PhD graduates do not go into academia. They go work at a national lab, they work in a startup, or they go work for a major company. How early do you plan? I just told you, we're starting right now. If you really haven't put a whole lot of thought into this, it's never too early. You don't decide as a senior in high school you want to go to college, and you shouldn't be a senior in college deciding whether you go to graduate school. I mean, you need to be thinking about your options along the way. We're going to spend some time and talk about what you need to know about graduate admissions. And I think this year, more than ever in my professional career, I'm telling students, you've got to keep your options open because we can't predict the future. With COVID-19 and too many cases going the wrong direction, companies struggling financially, you just have to keep your options open because we can't predict what's going to happen in May and June when some of you are finishing a degree. One of the ways to keep an option open, and we'll talk more about this later, is deferring admission. It's fairly standard in higher education. If you're admitted and decide you want to go work for a while, most schools are going to defer your admission for up to a year. Why a graduate degree? I think there's some really important things you need to think about. I will never dispute that you're going to get job offers and you're going to get nice salaries. But I will be the first to tell you, if you haven't heard this, that money is not everything. If you want to do more challenging work, chances are you're going to need a graduate degree. There are higher salaries associated with graduate degrees. If you want to start out in your career at a higher level and move more quickly, a graduate degree is going to help you. I talk about long-term versus short-term. I mean, you're going to make a decision when you finish your bachelor's degree, and it may be to go work. That's a very short-term decision. A long-term decision is thinking about where do I want to be someday and how do I get there and where does a graduate degree fit in? And then my last bullet point here is how long will you enjoy your first position with just a bachelor's degree? Here are some interesting facts to consider. I hope that I'm going to tell you some things that you don't know. I hope most of you know that a PhD should not cost you anything. When you're admitted to PhD study, we're going to pay your tuition, we're going to provide a monthly stipend, and most of us also pay for your health insurance. And for most of you, you really don't know what that means. Health insurance at a major university today is probably about $4,000 a year. So if someone says this is your stipend, you've got to turn around and say, okay, who's handling the health insurance? If I have to have it, are you paying for it? Are you paying part of it? Or is that my total responsibility? More than 60% of the PhD students in the United States are not from the United States. I would tell you that master's enrollments probably are well over 80% international. When we look at our application pools at Northwestern every year, about 70% of our PhD pool is international, and somewhere 85% are international students. PhD applications have been on a downward decline, but I think we may see a bigger drop this year, especially when the majority of our students are coming from China, and whether it's COVID-19, travel bans, if it's the relationships between countries, I really think that our international pools could drop. It could be 10%, it could be even more than that. My bottom line for all of you is we simply need more US students going to graduate school. Let's talk a little bit about graduate admissions. I don't know of anybody today that has a paper application. They're all online. You go in, you start an account, and you can put your name and your address, your birth date, do the simple things. And then you take a peek at other things and say, wow, this is going to be a little bit harder to do this. Most of us want at least 2, if not 3 letters of recommendation. I cannot make a general statement, and a university can't, because you need to go to the department. If the minimum is 2, and you know you have 2 really good recommenders, and you think 3rd is a wild card, do not submit 3. That is unnecessary, and you could hurt your chances. All of us will have some type of essay question. It could be called a personal statement, a statement of purpose, or some schools have specific essay questions. Tell us about your research experience. Tell us about what you want to do with respect to research in your PhD program. And then someone may say, what are your career goals? All of us typically will want a resume or CV. If there are limits, it's going to be by the department. So make sure that you're going to comply with what is on their admission page. Most of us allow unofficial transcripts to be uploaded as you apply. And then what we do for those students who are going to enroll with us, then we want the final transcript that shows your degree has been awarded. All of us want to evaluate research experience for a PhD applicant. So make sure with your resume, the application, an essay question, wherever it's appropriate, share as much as you can about your research experience. Generally, interviews are not required. If someone really likes you, I had a student the other day say, well, is that good? And I said, absolutely. If someone's going to set up a Skype interview, that means that they're really interested in you, or they would not be doing that. But they may want to probe and see how good of a match you are. But generally, an admission decision is based upon your application credentials, not an interview. We usually center admissions on the fall. If you happen to be graduating in December, then it's important you ask a school, do you take people in the winter quarter, the spring semester? And some schools may. Most of us, because of funding and other issues, center admissions on the fall. Application fees tend to run from $50 to $100 or more. And if you feel like you have special needs and that is going to keep you from applying, then it's worth asking the school, how do I qualify for a fee waiver? We're not going to have time for this, but if you want to know the demographics of every engineering graduate program in the country, the American Society for Engineering Education has profiles. So I submit about 80 pages of data, and you can go in and look at a particular program, see how many female students they have, how many international. If I'm an underrepresented minority, am I going to be in an environment where there are other people like me, or am I going to be the only one? But you can go into that and learn a great deal. US News and World Report has rankings. If you don't have access to that, you can always drop me a note, because a lot of times I'll have a spreadsheet with the top 25 or 50. If you're close to a faculty member who is well connected and you say, I want to get a degree in chemical engineering, where would you recommend I apply? They could be a great resource. And then sometimes you put this together on the front end where you're going to apply, but then on the tail end, you're going to be admitted. And most of us belong to the Council of Graduate Schools. So a PhD student has until April 15th. So sometimes you want to take the data, crunch the numbers, and really figure out where you think the best fit is for you and your background. I learned this a number of years ago, and I feel very strongly about this. And that's why I do these presentations. That's why when I say, if you want to send me your statement of purpose, if you want to send me a resume, a CV, I'm happy to help, because I work very passionately to make sure that we have US students, especially going to graduate school. With all that's going on in the world right now, companies have to sponsor international students if they're going to work on OPT, and some companies may be, especially in this environment, more reluctant to sponsor students. My last slide is my contact information. I'm always happy to share the PowerPoint. You see my email address. Although I'm in the office today, this is the fourth day I have been in the office in the last 7 months. So when the phone rings, I get a message that comes in my email saying you missed a call from this number. Or if you leave a voicemail message, they try to type the message. They're kind of funny to read because some words just come out very differently. So the best way to get in touch always is via email. And with that, I'm going to stop. And I'm sure that people are tracking questions. So I am happy to start taking questions. And we got done in less than 30 minutes. So we've got plenty of time. Do not be bashful. Ask your questions. And, you know, as I said later on, if it's personal, if it's detail, we can take it offline, but I'm ready for some questions.
Are you able to hear me through Zoom?
I can hear you.
Okay, I have a question if that's okay. My name's Jessica. So I am going to a school in Massachusetts, WPI. And so I'm studying mechanical engineering is for my bachelor's. And I decided I wanted to get a master's too in robotics. And I'm doing that in 4 years. So I ended up deciding that I was thinking about doing my master's, the non-thesis option, because I'm really not quite sure what specific like industry or type of robotics I'd want to do. But I'm trying to figure out, maybe that's where you can give me some advice on, is that like a bad option if I'm not sure, like super specific what I'd want to do, but I know I want to do robotics. And that like do you think getting a PhD after already having your master's is like a step up, or do programs like not like that? I'm just curious to like hear your thoughts.
Okay, I've got several answers for you. The first thing I'll say is probably nationwide, 2/3 of the people who do a master's degree do it without thesis. So sometimes students say, should I do it with a thesis? And my response is, if you've not done much research and you think a PhD is in your future, then it might be important to do a master's with thesis and get a flavor of if that is something I would want to do. Now, the huge drawback is this. I told you that we fund PhD students. Most master's programs are not funded. So that means if you choose to do a master's, there's a good chance you're going to have to pay for that. There's a good chance you're going to have to borrow money. At Northwestern, we allow students to apply for PhD admission, mark the application that they want master's consideration, if not admitted to the PhD program. That helps us because we can move the application without email communication back and forth. Now, if you really want to do some heavy duty research with a degree in robotics, then going directly into a PhD program could be an important thing. I would estimate that 80% of our new PhD students come to us out of a bachelor's degree program. We do have some people that get a master's and then do the PhD, but you're at no disadvantage to go directly into a PhD program without doing a master's in between. But that sometimes varies from one school to another. Some schools may force you to go through a master's before they'll consider you for PhD admission. But that's fairly rare. Does that help, Jessica?
Yeah, that does. Yeah, I just I'm a junior, so I'm really trying to figure out, like, especially since I'm not taking the extra year for a master's, and like how I kind of figure out like this process. And that's kind of, I was really interested to actually like hear what you had to say, and this I think really helped me put on like a better path of where I can start looking. And so like trying to start understanding, oh, what's my next steps? Like, how do I even go about figuring out what PhD program I might be a potential fit for, or what I like?
Well, robotics is a big field. And
yes.
for people that are serious about a PhD, probably the most important thing you can do is to go to somebody's website. And we have probably about 8 faculty. And the tricky part is it in mechanical engineering, computer science, or another field? Our mechanical engineering folks do most of the robotics work. So you can always look at a website, look at the faculty, and then drill down into their website, their research group, because if you apply for PhD admission, you want to connect yourself and say, I could see myself in that person's lab setting doing that research, because our robotics people do different things. And one person may be a great match, and someone else you might look at and say, I have no interest in that. So you're a younger student, you've got a year. I would talk to faculty. I would talk to a number of people and say, you know, if I went on and did a PhD, what kinds of things could I do that I couldn't do with just a master's degree?
Bruce, I've got
Awesome. That's some great advice. Thanks.
I've got several questions from Huba. Do you want? They don't have the names associated with them, but
That's fine.
do you want me to read it and then I'll let
Sure.
you respond? Okay. The
Sure.
first one is it better to submit a CV or a resume?
I would read the department. You know, when you do undergraduate admissions, and I've been a director of undergraduate admissions at a major university, it's all centralized. Graduate admissions is completely decentralized. But someplace on a department website, they're going to say, we want this, we want that, you know, 2 pages, no more than 1 page. So I can't generalize. I'm sure a lot of schools are going to say either one. I think the most important thing that you can do is represent yourself as well as you can, so they really know who you are. Years ago, I had a student write and say they didn't know this about me. And I said, well, they didn't know that about you because you didn't put it in your application. So you want to make sure that the things that are important, you're putting in a CV, a resume. On the Northwestern application, as of 2 or 3 years ago, the graduate school decided to put a bunch of boxes in the application. So you try to put in a box the research you did in the summer of 2019, and then what you did during the school year, et cetera. So you've got to go to the website for the department and see exactly what they ask.
Okay.
Dylan, go ahead with the next one.
All right. Does an in-person graduate degree have more weight in industry than an online graduate degree?
That's a great question, and I have a pretty strong bias. But I think a lot of the things that you do, it's very difficult in engineering to do those things online. There are some fields I'll give you an example. Engineering management. Engineering management's kind of a cross between an MBA and an engineering degree. And there's some outstanding universities in the United States that do that online. I had a student write the other day about doing a PhD online. And I had to write back and say, a big chunk of your time in a PhD program is doing research. And to do that online, in most cases, would be next to impossible. So I think it depends upon the field. I think it depends upon the research you're going to do. And, you know, there are going to be some companies that know that the Georgia Tech online program in whatever is an outstanding program, and that's not going to bother them. But in general, you've got to be careful, I think, with some online programs.
Okay. Do you need to have a research question ready when applying for a PhD?
I don't know that you have to have the research question, but I think you need to define what you want to do and what you're passionate about. Because here's what happens. I'm going to make up a fictitious department. Let's say a department gets 350 PhD applications. They have 5 research areas. So when a student puts in their application, they're interested in robotics and controls, then that subgroup of applications will go to that group of faculty. So you've got to demonstrate to them what it is that you want to do so they know that it matches with what they're doing and they can envision having you in a research group. But to have a specific research question, no, but you really need to explain what it is you're trying to accomplish so we know that you're potentially a good match for what we're already doing. A student recently wrote to me and said, can I just come and do whatever I want to do? And I said, look, our research is funded by grants, and those grants are written to do something specific. So you can't come in and say, use your grant funds so I can go off on this tangent and do whatever I want to do. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay, I think the last one I've got from Huva is, what are the main differences in online and in-person master's degrees?
Well, as I said, if you're doing research, it's pretty hard to do some of that online. I think we probably, in the last 7 months, have had a lot of things we've done remotely. And while you may see some pluses, there are probably negatives. But I think it depends upon the field. We have engineering management at Northwestern that's strictly in person, but there are other schools that have hundreds, if not thousands, of online students. So I think it depends, and it depends upon whether you're doing a master's courses only, and you can do all that online, versus doing a master's with thesis, where you really, I think, need to be in a lab and undertake that type of research. So, you know, to decide one or the other, you've got to do a lot of research. You should be asking people, and it's a tough question, especially in the environment we're in right now.
That's all the questions I've got from Huva right now.
Okay,
Hello, I have a question.
sure.
My name is Muriel Ross. I'm attending Santa Clara University studying bioengineering, and I'm going to be a senior, so I'm in the process right now of applying for grad schools. And I guess I was just wondering, what would be like the biggest piece of advice that you would give students who are applying to grad schools, or like something that you wish you knew when you were applying?
Well, I'll go back to this again. When you have an essay question, you need to follow the instructions. because you can't write an essay that's good for everybody. Somebody wants more your background and they're looking in the rearview mirror. Others want you to define what you want to do and then really connect. So it's usually a pool that's really well qualified. So it's not like we've got 350 people and 8 of them are really good. There could probably be 150 people that are really good. So, you know, they've got excellent grades. They have strong letters of recommendation. They've done research. But I think most importantly, Muriel, it's connecting yourself with the people. I said this years ago, and someone said, well, that's going to be a lot of work. And I came back and said, how badly do you want to be admitted? You know, most of us have a system that allows something. I'm going to give the big secret out here. If there are 350 applications, a faculty member is not going to read 350 applications. Our faculty members are going to say, I want to know who listed me in the application. Either in the our application, there's a line for 4 people. So you can name 4 faculty you're interested in. But then in the statement of purpose, you can say, I'm really interested in this person, and I've read about their research. I've looked at a couple of their journal papers. I could really see myself doing that. So if you're a football team and you're in the red zone and you want to get a touchdown, to me, it's the essay you write that's really going to connect with someone, where the faculty member goes to the admission committee and says, that is a person that I think would be an outstanding fit in my research group. You know, lots of students have great credentials and then they fall flat on their essay because they just don't make a connection. I had one year, a few years back, I had 5 students in the same year wrote a generic essay, and when they uploaded it in our application, they had the name of the prior school. I have always wanted to be a PhD student at the University of Michigan. I wrote back and I said, we're not the University of Michigan, but I am a nice guy. And if you want to correct your essay and send it to me, I will swap it out and I will never tell anybody in the department that you originally sent something that referenced the University of Michigan. Does that help, Muriel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. We still have 25 minutes, folks. I'm going to throw out a new topic, okay? GRE scores. And let me tell you what's going on. I had a student write recently, and he asked me the question. I wrote back and said, the department is not going to use, nor are they going to require the GRE. It's not even optional. We don't want it. So the student writes back and says, well, I just read on the website that they're going to require the GRE. I said, okay, websites are often out of date. People don't get them updated. I'm the assistant dean for graduate studies, and I just wrote to you today. Now, which one do you think is the accurate answer? So here's what's going on. In fact, I've got a meeting this afternoon with all the Big Ten colleagues. Usually the GRE is not a question at the whole university. Usually it's not a question in the academic school or college. It's usually a question within a program. So I have 9 different departments. And we were scrambling around until a few weeks ago. And I have 2 departments out of the 9 who have said we're requiring it. The others have said we're not going to require it. And those of us in the dean's office have said, okay, you're going to have a level playing field. If you're not requiring it, you're not going to use it. Because one person's going to have good scores, another person's going to have bad scores, and someone else is not going to have any scores. So you can't just pick and choose and use GREs for or against an applicant. So there's a lot going on. Now, don't confuse 2 issues. And again, I've been in this business a long time. I've worked in undergraduate, professional school admissions, graduate admissions. I want as much information as I can have to make a decision. The GRE is a good predictor. The big question right now is a lot of test centers have been closed. And most of us do not want to respond to hundreds of applicants who write and say, I can't take the test. So we're not saying the GRE is not any good. We're saying there are so many students with COVID-19 that just haven't been able to take the GRE. Now, should you just say, well, I'm not going to take it and I'll only apply to schools where the GRE is not required? I'm not sure that's the way to go. But I would make sure that if somebody doesn't need it and your scores are not real terrific, I would not volunteer them. Because the pools, as I've said earlier, are very competitive. And if you see any flaw, a mediocre recommendation, number 3 is just not strong. Somebody doesn't like where you did some summer research, or whatever. People use something to pull you out. So if you are a solid applicant and volunteer mediocre test scores, you could pull yourself out of the pool. But the GRE is probably the biggest question. And then if you're a junior, you're going to have to stay on top of things, because if we get COVID-19 under control, test centers reopen, then we're no longer looking at, we've got a majority of students who can't even take the test. The departments are going to do without the GRE for a year, then they're going to have to stay. Was that admission process as good as it would have been as in the past when we had GRE scores? See, we're going to have a number of international students apply, and they've done their undergraduate work in their home country, and we have a transcript with grades, and this is not one of the top schools in that country. And I have no test scores. So I'm fearful that a number of those students, and in the United States, I had a student the other day contact me from a small school in Iowa. But most people in engineering would not know the school because they don't have engineering. He was a physics major. So without test scores in a school that most people don't know, I'm not sure he's going to get the benefit of the doubt if he's on the fence and someone's trying to decide. So it's going to be an interesting year, and all you can do is check with the department and say, what's your position on the GRE in 2021 admissions? And I look for a lot of things to come back to normal for 2022, because I would not want to be making decisions without the benefit of test scores.
Bruce, I've got a couple questions again coming in from Huva. The first one is, I haven't made any solid connections with professors. Who else can I ask for a letter of recommendation from?
That's a tough question because faculty review the graduate applications, and they're going to put a greater emphasis in a faculty member who writes. But what you don't want to do is get someone that writes. I've looked back in my records, and John took my course when he was a sophomore and got a really strong A-. That doesn't tell us anything. We already had that on the transcript. So there are going to be some places where they're going to say, we need at least 2, we need at least 3 recommendations. One has to be a faculty member. Probably the most important thing to do is to go to someone, whether you really know them well or not, and just say, I am applying for graduate admissions. Do you feel comfortable writing me a strong, not just letter of recommendation, strong letter of recommendation? And if you don't like their reaction, I don't think you can afford to use them, because 95% of the recommendations are always glowing. So anytime you have one that doesn't say what you want, or they hint that there might be a problem, that's going to hurt you. It's probably going to pull you right out of the pool. Next question.
If my goal is to become a PE, is it better to get a master's or a PhD degree?
I missed what their goal is career-wise.
I'm sorry, if their goal is to become a professional engineer, a PE, licensed PE.
It probably depends upon the field, but a master's might be fine. You know, I think you've got to ask people, and a lot of times if you're younger and you do an internship someplace, I would ask around. I'd say, you know, to be in that position, is a master's degree enough, or do you need a PhD? So I think to be a professional engineer, probably a lot of those individuals have a master's. We have a unique person in civil engineering. He is a professional engineer. He has his PhD. His wife's on the faculty, his tenure track, and he was working as a professional engineer in a major structural engineering company, and we hired him. He's an outstanding teacher. He ran graduate admissions for a few years, but he has no desire to be tenure track. So, you know, there's a professional engineer that went into academia. But I would say if you're going to be in industry, a master's may be sufficient. But I'd ask around in the field. We've got 15 minutes, folks.
Dr. Lindvall, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I am a senior at the University of Akron in mechanical engineering, and I was planning on going and getting a job right out of my bachelor's, but I want to keep my options open. I have a little bit of research experience with a professor at Akron, but I haven't looked too much into grad schools. What path should I take, if at all, if I'm too late at all? That'd be my main question.
Well, I think you can do 2 things. And I work with a number of students in undergraduate engineering at Northwestern. And my response is keep your options open. You know, apply for jobs, but also apply for graduate school. Because if COVID-19 gets worse and companies are in dire financial straits, then certainly there are going to be chances that the jobs are not going to be abundant. And if the jobs are not abundant and the family doesn't want you living at home, mooching off them for 2 years, then it probably makes sense to go to graduate school. And that might be a master's degree rather than a long-term commitment. And as I said earlier, it's pretty standard practice that you can defer admission for a year. And some students, I've had some students do some interesting things. I've had some students go out and do an internship, and they know it's an internship, and they know that it'll turn into a permanent position if they perform well and the company wants to hire them. So if it turns into a position, then they may work and keep a deferral on their admission for a year. The CE or the COO and president of SpaceX is a woman that has her bachelor's in mechanical and a master's in applied math from our engineering school. So SpaceX is popular at Northwestern. And I had two students one summer, and they were both in the BSMS program. They finished the bachelor's and they'd started their master's. So they both wrote to me independently and said, I'm doing an internship at SpaceX. So one student about halfway through the summer said, it's not going real well, I'll be back. The other student was doing really well, and they wrote to me at the end of the summer and said, I am so excited. I was just offered a permanent position at SpaceX. Well, the student that came back and did his master's was then offered a job at SpaceX with his master's. So, you know, I would apply to both. It may be harder for you to get into PhD admission without research like other students may have. But in some fields, research may not be as critical as others. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I definitely appreciate your answer. Thank you.
No problem.
I've got a couple more questions. In a normal world, when is the best time to take the GRE?
I will tell you the worst time to take it. In the fall of your senior year, when you're trying to do everything to graduate and you put everything off in the summer. To me, you ought to take it in the summer between the junior and senior year, when you're not rushed by everything else. You're not studying for midterms, turning in a project. And let me say this about the GRE. I've been in college admissions work. I've used SAT, GRE, ACT, you name it. There are two really important things you need to do. The first thing is you need to be familiar with the type of questions, and I'm coming back to that. The second thing you need to do is to take a practice test or two and get your timing down. The GRE quantitative section is not differential equations, linear algebra, advanced calculus. It's pretty simple math. So you can go to ets.org. Educational Testing Service does the GRE and the TOEFL for international students, and they have practice tests. They have retired questions, and they're on the website. It's free. So I would just get used to the types of questions. You don't want to spend 6 months thinking you know what you're doing, go in to take the test, and you about have a heart attack because you didn't study the right things. I mean, people want to see that a test score is an evil thing. But for me, it's an important thing to put things in perspective. Because if you're coming from a school that we don't know much about, a test score can put you over the top as opposed to, gee, you know, that school can't possibly be as good as this school, so therefore we probably shouldn't take a chance on this student. Next question.
I've got one. Has the offering of fully virtual master's degree increased given the current pandemic?
I don't know that it has. You know, if you go to ASEE Profiles, you're going to see some schools that have 4,000 master's students. And when you see numbers that big, you know that they're not all in a classroom. There are some schools that do a tremendous amount online. There may be some schools that will pick some things up. So have online programs increased? I would guess some, but you know, we haven't picked up a single online program. We have none. And there are probably some faculty that say, this is so much work. I would never want to teach like this all the time. We don't have a choice during the pandemic, but I certainly would rather have students in a classroom than to try to do all this remotely. So I don't think it shifted things a whole lot, but some schools, to try to survive financially, you know, they may be doing that more. But when you go into ASEE Profiles and you look at the number of people in certain fields at certain universities, I mean, Southern Cal, Georgia Tech. I mean, there are a number of schools that have a lot of online programs, and they had them in place before the pandemic. Any other questions?
That's all I've got from Huva.
Well, I'm going to repeat this, and no one's paying me to say this, but I care deeply about students, and I'm passionate about helping people. And one of the reasons why I say you can send me these things is because a small percent take me up on it. Now, I have in my inbox this morning several things. You know, you told me you'd do this, here it is, and I'll respond. But you can't bother me. And you know, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I have colleagues across the country. And if you said, you know, Northwestern's okay, but I think I really want to go wherever, I may know someone and could say, that's the person you ought to write to at the University of Michigan. That's the person that you should write to at Purdue University. Because I haven't touched upon this, and I will. Sometimes students hear that you got to write to faculty before you apply for admission. Are you taking students? Are you doing this? Most faculty in America are not going to respond to your emails like that. They may interact with you after you apply for admission. Now, I spoke at Argonne one year, and I had one young lady come up and she argued with me. Well, everybody I write to always writes back to me. I thought, okay. And then a whole bunch of other students came up and rescued me and said, you're right. I've written, I don't know how many people, and no one ever writes back to me. So for me, unless a school says, you've got to line up someone who wants to fund you, admit you, etc., I would focus on the application, putting their names, connecting with their research in your application, because then everybody reading your application can see that. If you write to one professor and that email sits in the inbox, it didn't do you any good whatsoever. So my word is, don't waste time writing to faculty, because very few are going to engage with you. When you apply for admission someplace, it's good to know who the person is that's your go-to person. And it's typically not going to be the chair of the admission committee. Anybody that writes to me, I have access to every application, and I go to the application, then I go to the department and say, they just wrote, their file's not marked complete. The file is complete. I've marked it complete. Make sure you stay on top of these things. But a lot of times you apply and you just feel like my application went into the black hole and there's no one that's communicating with me. Undergraduate admissions and graduate admissions are very different.
Bruce, before we wrap things up, I've got a question if you have time. Are you able to defer admissions for a year to pursue in-state residency?
Okay. At a private university, there is no such thing as in-state, out-of-state. And I've been this route before at 2 public universities, Purdue and Kansas. And typically it's the Board of Regents, it's the registrar who has a set of policies on what it takes to establish residence. Now, on one hand, becoming an in-state student at the graduate level probably doesn't make any difference in terms of admission. But if there's a differential at the graduate level between in-state tuition, out-of-state tuition, at the master's level, that would make sense. But at the PhD level, whether it's a public or private university, it's not going to matter because we're going to take care of your tuition. It's not going to cost you anything. Our tuition is $19,343 a quarter. But if you're a PhD student, whether it's Purdue, Northwestern, it becomes $0. So residence at the undergraduate level can have some benefits. At the graduate level, I don't know that there are very many public universities that are going to worry about whether you're an in-state or out-of-state student for graduate admissions. It's just a different situation.
All right, I guess I will wrap things up. I just wanted to say on behalf of Tau Beta Pi, we want to thank Dr. Lindvall for answering these questions and for this great presentation. It's been a pleasure to have you present. And just a reminder that if you want to tell your chapter members or other Tau Bates that there will be another session tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern with Dr. Lindvall as well. So this will conclude this session, and we just want to remind you to access the agenda in Whova for all other sessions and provide your feedback on this session via the rate feature in Whova. Dr. Lindvall, is there anything else you'd like to say before we end the session?
Yeah, I will be in the recruiting fair the next 2 days. When I checked this morning, there are a lot of open slots. And you've heard me say this, and I'm going to say it another time. This does not have to be a discussion about Northwestern. You know, if there's something we discussed today and you want to ask me about it and you're applying for admission to other places, sign up. I am happy to help because I'm going to be in my office. I have 2 monitors. I'm going to track all my appointments, and they're kind of, you know, 1 here, an hour off, 2 more here, and I will track that all day long. So if I can have a conversation with you about anything, I'm happy to do it. It does not have to be related to Northwestern. But thanks, everyone. You had great questions. I look forward to interacting with you down the road.
Thank you again. Have a good day, everyone.